It's really funny. I keep coming back to what you said about the necessary evil. I think that's good. That could be the name of this podcast, FinOps, the necessary evil. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Applied FinOps. My name is Amit Kinha, and I'm joined with Frank. I work at DoiT as a field CTO, where I spend most of my time helping engineering and finance teams actually agree on something, which if you've ever been in that room, you know it's harder than it sounds. This podcast has been something I've been wanting to do for a while because I kept finding myself in conversations that felt too important to stay internal or in the halls of FinOpsX. Conversations about what is FinOps actually becoming. Not the theory, but the messy real-world version of it. And I figured the best way to have these conversations out loud was to find someone who'd been in the trenches even longer than I have and just start recording. And that's why Frank and I decided to do this. So, Frank, if you want to quickly introduce yourself, if not, we can get right into it.
Oh, I'm not going to introduce myself, but I think I appreciate the fact that you say some conversations are better have in public than they are in the corridors of FinOps X. There are tons of people in our case. One of the things was we were highlighting also was we want let's say people who have been doing FinOps for a long time to have also some material to focus on the people which are, as we say, in the trenches for quite a long time that are solving the big FinOps problems, uh, because we felt that, yeah, we are having this conversation, but almost always in private, and it's good to have it out there.
Absolutely. So for this episode, what I wanted to talk about was the State of FinOps 2026. The report dropped last week, and I think you and I had the same reaction when we first read it. There's a lot happening in this data itself that deserves more than just, say, a LinkedIn post. And the discipline is changing in ways this year in particular that feels very significant. And we want a place to actually work through what it means. So the first things first, what are some of the themes that you saw that really stood out to you this year?
The first thing that I saw that stood it for me was and it's not on the data, it's the fact that for the first time they've shared the SMB enterprise and larger enterprises. You can filter by this, which will help enormously, in my opinion, when you're doing an assessment of FinOps to compare the priority of the person, the assessment you're doing versus what the others in that same size of industries are doing. The other thing was obviously, in some way, the expansion of FinOps. We started with scopes, and now with the change of mission, it's even wider. It's technology as a whole, which is just massive. And so, what I hope to see soon, but I'm not sure, is the amount of people that are in FinOps teams. Is that going to grow by four times? Because the scope definitely did by four times. That was the first thing that came to mind. And you?
It's really interesting you mentioned that because in a similar vein, what stood out to me was the number of people in a FinOps practice on average is still 3 to 5 people. And we're talking about 3 to 5 people managing the complexity of optimization, of contextualizing data, of understanding some level of cost governance, sometimes over $100 million a year with about 5 people. It almost feels like we're in this place now where FinOps is not just a conversation for one team, but finally this idea of shift left that we've been talking about for years, it not only has to happen today, right? It's getting to a level where every engineer who is writing code is no longer thinking about just the application logic, but especially with AI nowadays, the cost is front and center going forward. So conversation is shifting from just only in technology or in these silos for procurement or finance. And now there's a need at this level to actually have a conversation that encompasses all those and even more beyond that.
And the interesting other bit is when you look, we're talking about the expansion of the scope, and you look on the data, I say AI 98%. In the next 12 months, are expecting to have to manage AI 90% SaaS, licensing 60%, 57% private cloud, 48% data center. So the scope is enormously increasing. And I agree also, AI is a very specific workflow. It will require new things. It is so new that we don't have anything as stable as we used to have VMs. We still new VMs, they were just presented differently. Now you have AI, the spikes are different. Someone told me that you can change the voltage consumed by NVIDIA GPUs in real time. So I know that there is an app that does that. And you say,
Right.
this is going to create another layer of automation and requirements. It's going to be huge.
Yeah, this expansion of scope really, part of me thinks it's because on one level, when you get the granularity offered by cloud, from a cost perspective, we go from when we were running in data centers, you have the CapEx cost, you have some level of visibility in terms of utilization. But with cloud, you're getting, say, 2 GB of data a day from AWS, right, in the Curve file, or BigQuery from GCP. And when we're able to show the value of what we can do with this data, to make better decisions, to make more informed decisions, the question that's often gets asked at the executive level, saying, "This is great, but this is only part of the story. The rest of the story is the other costs that I have that are not in this fashion, and can we get there?" And I think to me, it's a good thing, because oftentimes when we look at costs in isolation from, say, public cloud, it's only telling part of the story. And I think especially with the rise of data cloud, so, using Databricks or Snowflake, on, it is no longer a nice to have to say, well, on one hand, we have this beautiful dashboards, we have reports that show you everything about your AWS or GCP footprint, and the Snowflake cost is on the side. We'll worry about it later. It's becoming that, well, why can't we do the same thing there? So I think generally speaking, even the licensing thing, the rise of it, it's partially due to because licenses are so much more flexible now as well. Example of that could be, say, Copilot licenses for your institution or enterprise. Before, it could be that, we signed up for 1,000 licenses, whether we use them or not, it's okay. But now we get utilization data of who's actually using Copilot. And so oftentimes the demand for license management is not so much about just pure chargeback and showback. There's also an optimization aspect to it that wasn't really present before.
That's interesting. I didn't know about the Copilot that you would get the information back. There is the other big thing, which is it is not just on the data, but it is about focus. I was talking with Matt yesterday. It is focus is evolving. They and for me, there is a slight frustration into the focus is the fact that it feels to me that we don't have native focus generation from the vendors, for example. And so I see the aggregation, I see the focus becoming more and more useful, more and more used. I still don't know. I haven't got a clear answer. For example, if I can take the focus data from an Azure environment, from a GCP environment, from an AWS environment, do a union all of them, and the sum of how much it tells me it costs is the sum of my bills. Even just that simple thing. How efficient. And you are on the field, I made way more than I am on this. So how do you see focus being used, and is it effectively compatible today, or as they are doing, they are working to, we need some additional effort to make it really interoperable?
I think the challenge with, for those who don't know, Focus is a specification that was started a couple of years ago. And the real idea is, let's standardize the way we do cost billing. And so instead of having, the same thing, AWS, you have an account, and GCP, you have a project. And these are both the same idea. It's a collection of resources tied with some perimeter around it. And, on the cost side as well, there's a lot of different fields. We might have amortized cost, some people call it blended cost, on and on and on. And that's only talking about the CSP level. You think about SaaS and PaaS and on everywhere, it's just very, very difficult to create one unified data set. And so what Focus really is trying to solve for is that we don't each have to solve this individually, right? We don't all have to figure out, hey, for my company, we have some data set that we named without really thinking about it, and 2 years later, we're regretting it. The example I think I used a couple of years ago when I was trying to implement this at City was, there'll be some fields that you want to be able to expose to your customers internally. And some of those fields, you're like, I can't show this one. This is something that we did 2 years ago, but it's irrelevant. The name doesn't make sense. And so instead of writing a data dictionary from scratch in every single institution, the promise of Focus is that on not only will each individual CSP and now SaaS as well be able to provide the data in some unified fashion, it's also that internally, the other advantage will be that you're able to now expose this data for analysis without having to rewrite from scratch a data dictionary as well. I think the challenge, though, is to your point, if you consider Focus being implemented by the CSPs and SaaS, what does that really accomplish? You essentially, if any enterprise that already has been ingesting data, or they're using a third party tool, they already have some semblance of a data set today. And so if you're exporting from Kurt, migrating over to the focus version of the Curve file, it really just feels like a spec update, like an API update that you're making, because your internal data set is still going to be whatever you had before. Right? So I think the over time, what's going to start happening, hopefully, is that the internal data sets for each individual company starts becoming focus compliant. Because then what you can do is when you onboard a new SaaS or a CSP, you don't have to think about what is a translation that has to happen for me to ingest this data. You can demand that, hey, I just need it in this specific format, because that's not only what my internal data set is, that's what all the other providers I'm using are as well. Now, where are we in the journey in terms of adoption and effectiveness of it? I think there's still truthfully some work left. I guess the hardest part about focus is now where we are today, which is there'll be some bespoke fields that only apply to certain CSPs or SaaS providers that are not relevant to the other ones. And so you get into this place where, some of the people I've been talking to, they essentially started to go down the path of, hey, let me use focus. I'm really excited about it. But it's still missing these key information that's only available in the card or only available from the BigQuery export. So we ended up doing combination of both. We extract from focus, but we're still taking in the data from card because it still has no parity compared to the original data set there. Right. So for me, the hardest part is not going to be, tomorrow morning we could have all these big cloud providers saying we're on focus 1.3, we have everything available. But what about the rest of the information that's getting lost, right? So until we get that parity, it's very difficult for companies that are, already mature at some level, already ingesting data to rip out whatever they have today and fully switch over to this new format going forward.
Yes. I think you were saying a couple of things in here. The first one being that we need in focus, I think it's been worked on, but you need to be able to expand it, to add tables, to connect table things together, to be able to almost regenerate what it would have been the original data set. So if instead of having a curve file and generate focus, which is I think what's happening at today, if we were from focus being able to regenerate our curve files on the other side, then that would make focus the important bit. And we would find all those columns, as you correctly say, that are missing. We would find all those data fields, which we don't have, and we can create independent columns. So I do like in the focus the structure that we have a basic structure for the basic stuff, which is cost equal usage time rates. I want this to be stable. It seems not to be even always stable for all cloud vendors. There's a second thing we're talking about, which is very interesting because I didn't think about it, is how almost all company already doing a conversion into something else. They are already the big ones. They're already doing a conversion to a format that match their needs. And so if, as usual, the FinOps Foundation is driven by its members, it's driven by the people which are the practitioners, I think there is a case for sharing what are the use cases that you have in your company that you cannot replicate in focus. And I don't know if there is an initiative to get that information because what you're really saying is that's blocking the adoption into big companies. Because if they knew that guaranteed that they can regenerate whatever they have internally, then it's easier to have someone to say, hey, you have all the data, make a bridge, build that bridge.
Absolutely. The one thing I do think focus is really useful for is because at the end of the day, what Focus is not only is a collection of columns of the data dictionary that's provided, it's
Yeah.
also a way of thinking about how to think about data fields that they haven't launched yet, right? For example, a category is a very specific thing in the Focus format. It should be essentially enums that you can use. So I think one of the applications that's being under thought about is that if you have data center cost, you have all these other collection of costs that we're describing that are not, as beautiful as when you get from the cur. Beautiful is a word with cur that I don't think anyone's ever said before, but in a way,
Yes, it's
there's a method to the madness, though, right? And now, if you think about like a data center cost, instead of having to think about how do I get parity with some utilization data that I'm getting, how do I do chargeback in my own company, you can actually leverage the focus standard and specification to create new columns and fields in the same manner that you would be getting from a cloud native SaaS or the CSP itself. I think especially now that we're migrating towards this conversions, right? Of it's not just FinOps data from cloud, it's not just data set or rather PaaS and the SaaS platforms. The rest of the cost is also being talked about frequently. One of the big things that was for me in the report was about this executive level presence, right? And
Yep.
it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I find what the foundation has done a really good job of is preparing the FinOps practitioner to understand the language, right? We have the capabilities, we understand the scopes, we have everyone who's certified in the company to be a FinOps practitioner. That's great. And yet, when we get to a certain level, right? Say it might be the CIO or it might be the CTO or VP or whatever. When you talk to them, there's still this gap between the translation that has to happen from great, you understand the FinOps domain and you are building a practice and everything, but we still have to be able to translate to communicate this information to these different domains. And I think that's where a lot of the struggles happen. I remember being in a room when I was at Citi talking to the CIOs, giving updates about our cloud spend. And the first time I did that, I was like, well, great, let's talk about the savings plans. Let's talk about the optimization recommendations, all these things that are really important to me, but at
Yes.
a certain level, it's irrelevant because at the end of the day, what information really matters to them is not going to be about these things. It's nice to have, but they really belong in an appendix, right? And I
Yes.
think this translation of how to talk to finance teams, right? How to talk to procurement and how to talk to executives, this level of upskilling, shifting up, as we start to call it
Yes.
FinOps, is going to get very important as cloud cost becomes not this corner thing of the budget that we're like, it's okay with AI, the costs are rising so quickly. We need to be more transparent than ever and be able to showcase that the value we're getting from a FinOps practice, it's not just a team that's, looking at tagging hygiene and building dashboards. They really are leveraging this information and getting in the right hands of the right people to make better decisions faster.
And and you remind me that we did a keynote about FinOps as a foreign language with Steven ages ago, and one of the thing was you need to remember also there is a big chunk of humility that we need to get into FinOps. Two reasons I'm going to present. The first one is money has been around for 5,000 years, which is longer than cloud, any installation of cloud, and so they whatever you're talking about, which is related to money, they probably have a name for it. And instead of having them to understand RIs and SPs, have you understand that this is a forward contract and it is a very standard thing in lots of industry. You pay up front and you get a discount for guaranteeing to pay for lengths of time. If I pay my rent for a year and I know I'm gonna stay for a year, I'm gonna get a discount. That's called forward contract, and we call it reserved instances, which is quite fun, or savings plans. And so you end up, I think there is this first bit. The second one, and we've talked about it, is there is almost an assumption in almost every documentation that you are working for a thriving startup. Every time we talk about FinOps, we are all working for thriving startups. And you're like, well, look at there are companies that are doing this or which are doing they are retail, they're doing stuff. And for these companies, cloud, even IT is a necessary evil. And the way we see ourselves is that, yeah, but you see, I do microphones. I need IT, but I need IT for very much a subset of things. And cloud is a subset of that. And FinOps is a subset of cloud. And so, quite often, if you want to be relevant, that's why I say we talk very much too often, my opinion, about having a seat at the C suite table, when I think you need to have the proxy. And that's why when you see the proxy is the person that is in your chain of command the closest, or the C suite person. So, learn the language you need to learn the level of message you need to pass back. And by the way, after having done 6 months of studying on that, the board cares about money and risk, and that's it.
Right. It's a really interesting idea of, the lead of the FinOps practice being well versed not only on, imagine like a Venn diagram, not only in cloud, not only in FinOps,
Yeah.
but also this context of the company, right? Because they're translators in chief at the end of the day of, you know, on one hand, if you just give the data in a dashboard, in a report, oftentimes I find on the data side, this concept of just cost data, it was only one part of the puzzle. And I think that's where a lot of practices fail to mature in a level where it's useful for the rest of the company. Because what ends up happening is you never really get to understand the other context of your business to be able to combine this data set together. Right. And I know we talk about, for example, till the cows come home about unit economics, right? It's all the
Yep.
rage, unit economics, this and that. But why do so few people adopt it? Why is it so complicated? the concept is not complicated. It's just division, right? You take a cost divided by n, and you have a value. I think the hard part is getting teams or the FinOps practitioner team in the middle to kind of understand what is the most valuable piece of information that is a unit, right? How do I ascertain that? In a startup, it could be, for a B2C, it could be the daily active user count. It could be for a larger enterprise, it could be revenue. It could be anything really. But getting to understand and collaborating with the product teams, with the finance teams, with really the stakeholders to understand what is it that you'd want to know about, right? And I think until we do that, we'll still be in this place where I always joke that if, on the weekend you get an alert from your cloud vendor of choice that says anomaly detected, $1 million went up. Now, one hand, you could freak out and start looking, start digging in what happened. Did someone turn on the P5 instance that we didn't know about? And then only you find out after you're in the front of TechCrunch and now you have a million new users coming to your website. So all of a sudden, this $1 million cost doesn't seem so bad because if you divide by the new users, your unit cost is actually going down, right? So without this contextualization of data and combining it with the cloud data, it's very difficult. It's almost like we're looking at you know, a very one-dimensional plane. And so this idea of, leveraging costs there to make better decisions, that only comes to fruition when you're able to, do the hard work up front, the homework of, well, what is the other data set that I have to combine by? What is the things that when someone logs in or someone gets a report, they find this information useful to make a better decision? Be it, hey, we should be investing more on this thing. We should be thinking about the ROI for this AI project we're building is not really materializing because, quantifiably, we can't prove it. So let's maybe not spend another $10 million in this POC that we're building or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. You were saying when there is one thing which is gonna make lots of, I think, film practitioners scream also is we do we there is an easy, I would not say easy, but there is a way to understand what are the ratios that are important. As you say, the cost is you
Yeah.
go and you take your quarterly report or you get your yearly report, and the CEO will have made announcements like, we're going to increase customer by 20%, we're going to reduce whatever by 15, whatever the things are. These are good candidates. If all of a sudden you can justify your budget by saying the CEO says we're going to increase by 20%, which means that this is going to mean that I'm going to increase by 15. So I'm asking for a 15% budget increase for next year. That would make sense. The problem is that these things, first, are usually very fluffy and high level. And second, they change quarterly. And so whatever you're setting up now, you need to be ready to reorganize it, to work through them. But these numbers, whatever numbers that the CEO said in the official thing that they've promised the board, that they've promised all the shareholders and investors, this is the thing you can really connect your cloud costs with something that they care about.
Right. It's almost this aha moment that you want people to have when you show them data that's contextualized with the thing they care about. It's almost like they're getting this next layer of insights that weren't available to them before. Instead of this black box of a number that they're always trying to push down on, like you said, necessary evil. Instead of looking at it from the alternate perspective, which I think a lot of people in technology share, that cloud enables you to move faster, right? Cloud enables you to go to different regions that previously, you want to sign a data center agreement in every country that has data residency requirements. Good luck. Now it could be the same Terraform code you wrote. It's just changing from US East 1 to whatever region you want to go to. And obviously, there's a little bit more work involved there. But I think that the speed that you can actually implement and create and build, it often gets lost because the paradigm shift still hasn't happened, that cloud cost is not just a number that we should always have heartache over. It should be something that we should be able to monitor and understand, like, the unit price is going down. This is good. Look at this region that we're launching in. We can have some level of confidence that, uh, you know, it's not going to blow up our budget, but more importantly, it's going to give us a new way to attack the market that we previously couldn't do. I think there's a level of heartache that happens with cloud costs because everyone's been burned, in my opinion, right? You get promised it's going to be cheaper, whoever told you that, maybe AWS or GCP, and you think, great, I don't need my data center. And the first bill, the ninth bill, wherever you get it, the sticker shock that you finally get. And then that's where I think a lot of finance practice start. And unfortunately, a lot of them start because optimization is the number one thing on top of people's mind. So there's this misnomer of, well, FinOps teams exist to continuously just optimize and lower the bill. which is definitely a big part of FinOps practice, but I think kind of misses the forest for the trees that a good FinOps practice not only is doing that, but I think with the right visibility, with the right governance structures in place, you can essentially use cloud and find the true value of cloud that was promised to you by enabling FinOps in your company as well.
Yes, and I think also you were talking about that first bill that we've all been burned to. Is quite interesting. Is when you I come from the data center. I've managed data center, healthcare data center in particular, and one of the things you discover is that, for example, electricity is managed by real estate, by a company that part of the company that manages all real estate. Another one is, hey, heating is also real estate. Network is managed by. The point is that when you enter the cloud, there are tons of costs that were not in my budget before
Right.
that all of a sudden are in your budget. And that was never explained in any formal way. And so you end up that you have a fully loaded cost, which contains everything. So from your perspective, it is probably cheaper on a unit as a company level, but as a department level, it might not be. And usually you are part of a department, the IT department, and you end up and say, but that's costing me more than before. And you say, yeah, but they should remove some money from real estate and pass it to you. Good luck with the war. But yes, I think that was one of the reasons where there was a promise which, in marketing terms, is correct. It just requires you to think a little more than just saying, oh, it's going to be cheaper than whatever you're paying today. As most of the time, it's more complicated.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept of the comparison of apples to oranges. Of I was doing this before. In a way, it's very similar to when we went from VMs to containers. You get promised, well, you're only going to be paying for the 4 gigs of RAM and 2 vCPUs you need going forward, and not the VM that's running continuously. And oftentimes, well, what that means then is you're relying on every engineer to figure out how much memory and CPU you really need, right? And if you think about it, as an engineer, with the shift left idea, um, I understand the value of it, right? It's a no brainer. But I think what ends up happening in practice is we end up telling engineers to say an engineer is building a Hello World application. You have to go from not only that, build it in a way that it can scale, that's secure, that it can be resilient, that we can do upgrades, blah, blah, on and on, the standard engineering stuff. And then on top of it, make sure it's efficient cost wise. And I think for a lot of engineers who are used to building on data centers, particularly, we kind of flip a paradigm without telling them. And the flip is when we buy, say, a VM or a Kubernetes cluster using OpenShift or whatever, you kind of you do this estimation up front, and now you get access to this data center's VM or Kubernetes cluster. And you're told, well, we're not going to unplug it in the middle of the night. And we're not going to be able to lower the memory after we purchased it. So maximize usage, right? You might as well use the hell out of it. And so a lot of times these functional requirements of say SLA or throughput or whatever, it's always from product side, it's like as much as possible, right? It's use and wring every dollar of value you can out of these things that we already provisioned for you. Because if you don't do it, it's not like we won't charge you. It's not like the company won't pay the bill for the data center electricity and everything. And when you go to cloud, oftentimes the biggest shift I think happens mentally for engineers and product alike is that you now have to have realistic SLAs and constraints, these non-functional requirements, because otherwise engineers will say, "Hey, I was able to take this thing that took 3 hours on prem, or this calculation that I'm running. We can do it in 5 seconds now." And on paper, you're like, "This is amazing. Cloud is great." But then you get the bill for it and you recognize, well, at what cost, right?
Yes,
And so being able to really think through what does a company really need, right? We're not just building technology for technology's sake ever. And so I think especially with cloud, these kind of constraints that I'm describing should be thought up front and realistically thought through. Do we really need to be able to do this in 5 seconds or less? Do we really need something that could be an asynchronous overnight process? And a lot of times when you're just running something on-prem, you never really have to have these considerations up front ever.
correct. And you remind me of a story which I used to say about the benefits of cloud, and it is related to HR. Okay, you have an HR system. Think about a big company; they have an HR system, and they need to do payroll every month. And payroll will take, with on-prem, will take 5 days because it's massive and it happens once a month. You're not going to put
Right.
lots of computers to it. So you have 5 days, which means that on a week before the end, you need to put a stop line to say no, no changes to holidays, no changes to anything can happen for these months after that date. But and that means that every month you carry a backlog, people get, and there is a problem. And what, for example, this kind of example, the cloud is brilliant because all of a sudden you can start asking, how do I make all my HR billing happen in an hour? Oh, you
Right.
need 2,000 servers. I need 2,000 servers for 1 hour. And I'm fine because I know the benefit I'm going to get is that my cutoff time now is 3 hours before sending payrolls out, which is way better for all the admin work that people need to do. But if you have a situation when you have my good old system that run 24/7, yes, you start you're slightly constrained in this case, and that's where you say the apple to orange start coming in. The cloud might be cheaper even on running if you buy 3 years all upfront and et cetera commitments, but it's not going to be as efficient as you would go into the cloud. Will have other benefits, like as you were saying, it's easy to set up, it's easy to change, it's maintained by someone else, security is organized by others, keys are also managed by others. So you're delegating tons of stuff, which before you or someone else was paying. So from the company perspective, it's a huge improvement, but it can be hidden into the intricacies of not in my budget.
Definitely. I think that quantifying ROI is something that
Ooh.
we've all been chasing for years now, and in a way, I don't think we're any closer. Even with something like unit economics, where we can say this is a price per thing. Now, especially with AI, like the world before we were, spending mass amounts on AI, ROI was still difficult to things you're describing that. Well,
Yep.
the cloud bill might be this compared to data center, but all these auxiliary functions, which are now leaner, that we have less risk of, right? So the risk appetite might be lower. Um, the overall spend in terms of funding technology might be lower, but you're not going to see that up front, right? You might not see that during the migration period because it's not like you can just switch all those things off. So you have this hump in the middle where you're trying to get over as you start to migrate. And in that time, there's a bit of a sticker shock that's happening because you're like, well, it's much cheaper on prem. Well, to your point, well, we didn't include the cost of the DevOps, the SecOps, or the the guy who's walking back and forth in a data center, making sure no one's breaking into it. It's just very difficult to, come up with a clear picture of this is the value we're getting. And then with AI now, it's even harder, right? Because a lot of the things that AI is doing, that people are leveraging companies for, we're going from quantitatively calculations of value to a lot more qualitative things as well, right? And so all of a sudden, you have your AI build, say you're using Vertex AI, you sign the provision throughput request for $1 million a month or anything like that, and you see people are using it, but then someone eventually will ask, well, okay, what value are we getting out of it? And if you're really using it because instead of going to Workday and seeing how many vacation days you have left, your chatbot can just tell you. I don't know. It's really hard to, justify that. Or even, from an engineering perspective, I think at this point everyone is using Claude Code or an equivalent, a CLI tool. How do you quantify that this developer is now more productive than they were before? On one hand, you could look at obviously metrics like, are we shipping faster? Are we able to, generate more features than we were before? Um, but at the same time, it begs the question of how do you actually quantify the value of these massive investments that we're being, asked to make in AI? I think it's giving a lot of consternation because in the State of FinOps report, I think we said 98% of practitioners now want to manage AI spend or being asked to, while told to do it. What does that look like? What does that really mean? Outside of just basic reporting of showing, well, the bill was this and I can allocate it. The question, again, the shift up will be, okay, and can you tell me whether this is a good thing or a bad thing? Should we invest more or less? These fundamental questions that I think the FinOps community has to be able to answer because we are seen as the stewards of cloud and we should be able to quantify these kind of numbers in any way that actually makes sense for a company to make better decisions.
I agree. I think the big challenge to that, or better, the solution I would say is you work on outcomes, but it's really hard to get an outcome. It's I know the outcome I'm trying to obtain with AI. So it was quite interesting. There was LVMH, so it is a luxury, massive luxury company and the biggest in the world. And one of the things they were doing is say, they've said clearly and publicly, this is our strategy for AI. But it was, we want AI to help us get more people in the shop to know more of our brands. And so it was really not about changing people, it was about
Right.
recognition and visibility. And they said, that's the only thing we're going to do. At that point, it is easier to see if AI succeeds. It is easier to say, yes, we've implemented this in our shops. We have 5% more people coming in. That's something you can justify, you can explain. But until you have that outcome defined,
Right.
you're going to go blind because you bring. No one knows the value of IT in general. Is we know we need servers, we just don't know how many. And it was there since the beginning.
It's really funny. I keep coming back to what you said about the necessary evil. I think that could be the name of this podcast, FinOps, the necessary evil. Shifting gears for a second. So, looking at this idea of shift left that we're talking about, of to me the it really is a measurement problem at the end of the day, right? It's a top priority in the report. Pre-deployment architecture guidance is a number one desired tool and capability, right? Governance and policy informants project to be the number one priority for everyone. And yet the question really becomes that what does it mean in practice? Right? On one hand, it almost feels a bit like Minority Report, the movie, where what people really want is that before I commit a line of code, before I spend the money and I get the fin oops moment, I call it, we like to know before so we can make better decisions. But being able to measure, for example, say I was writing a line of code that was going to spin up a cluster that was, say, 10, very expensive cluster. And I'm able to prevent that with a tool that says, well, you don't need that much. We did a, performance test and you really only need half the memory and CPU limit. How do you measure that? Because to me, the value of that platform now, to me, on one hand, if you did this after you're deployed, we could track it. We could say the result of the actions that we're taking from the FinOps practice result in 50% cost savings. But if I do it on the shift left side before it happens, it's a layer we call cost avoidance, right? But tracking that and understanding the value of that and justifying either the cost of the tool or the cost of the practice that you're running in your company, being able to measure that I think is really powerful that we kind of completely skip over today, right? It's the same as an engineer, being really, really down the weeds of Kubernetes and knowing this is how I measure and this is the controls and knobs and dials I have to turn to get really efficient and compared to the person who might not be doing that, finding that delta and being able to justify to say that is a direct result of us enforcing governance in place, right?
Yes.
I think it's very difficult to do, but I think it's very necessary to really show the value of FinOps beyond just here's a number and lower it by 20%. That's all you're good for.
Yes. That's very interesting. And I was writing down, I think I, I'm, I have conflicting, and I wrote recently how shift left makes me uncomfortable because there is if something goes badly, you can follow the trace back to the commit and the developer that did it wrong.
Right.
But you cannot if you don't know when things go well. And so it's really hard you are guaranteed to get the risk, but almost none of the reward at the moment, which I find uncomfortable. But what you can do on the other side is if you set up governance, if instead of letting the developer or the engineer make the decision based on that number, whatever you're doing is going to increase
Right.
the price by $3. Okay. What I think we need is, as we say, is connected with the business to have some sort of governance, potentially governance as code that can go through inside my code, and then they will tell me this is not acceptable because this software cannot reduce our margin. It's too vital. Or another one, which is, hey, this is experimentation. Just go for it. Who cares? I
Right.
think it would be much more useful if instead of giving you a number, it might give you the number. But otherwise it is, no, this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable for this instance. A feature cannot cost more. We are in this is, I don't know, the shopping basket of our website. This should not cost us more than 0.1% of the margin. It cannot.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you have something which is usable and doesn't put the burden on the dev. The system says no, so I cannot ship this. Now I can go and ask for exceptions because I have a good reason, but I think that would help.
Absolutely. I have this idea of, you open a PR and it's almost like, to your point, it's a constraint that says the approval for this PR is not just by the tech lead or the engineering manager. If it goes, the unit price for this functionality on aggregate goes higher because we're able to actually test it, right? As part of the CI/CD
Mhm.
build, we can actually test to say definitively this feature based on the numbers of, the volume that you're actually using in real life, the price point is going to increase by 10%. And when it increases over this number, the PR approval is not only coming from engineering, product and finance have to sign off on it as well.
Yes,
Because, oftentimes it's always these refactors that we do, or, the shiny new toy that AWS will say at reInvent. There's a new way of doing something and it's great. And functionally, nothing is changing. You're not adding value to the business at the end of the day. And all you're really doing is just, compressing margin. And to start to think about from that lens and not necessarily, to your point, just the cost going up and down, but, well, what is the value you're getting back in return? And we have quantifiable numbers that we don't want to increase beyond unless it's justified. It's a new feature that's going to grow revenue. That's great. Then maybe
yeah,
this is the cost of doing business going forward. Um, I think the theme that we're talking about is contextualizing cost data beyond just cost data alone and
yep,
really starting to think through the business data as well, right? And getting the relevant data into a platform or, whatever you're building in house. Because then when you talk to these individual teams, they see value in this cost data as well, right? They start to understand that, one of the places that I think often gets overlooked is that when a developer or engineering team puts out a feature, I'm sure a product team will say, even if you had this lens that says, hey, the cost will be this per million users that sign on, uh, what is product team really can do? Same with procurement. They can go to the engineering saying, is this the best we can do? Is there
yeah,
is there anything? And if engineering team says, nope, this is a cost of running in cloud going forward, when there might be something very different they could do to lower costs by like 50%. But there's like this level of ambiguity that exists in cloud because there's a thousand ways of doing anything, right? If I ask five developers, how do you build a Hello World app in AWS, you're gonna get 10 different answers, everything from a Lambda to all the way down to a VM, EKS, ECS, Fargate, you name it. It's very
absolutely.
difficult to ascertain what is the right architecture for this platform that I have or this application that I'm building and have a concrete idea of it versus, an optimization recommendation that you're like, yeah, I don't think this will apply for me. I'm going to ignore it. Right. And so I feel like getting this level of confidence for these individual teams that are in product, for them to know definitively this is a number. And I'm going to push back to my engineering team saying, lower it. You
Yeah,
figure it out. This is your constraint,
yeah,
and it might be that we can't ship the feature that you really want unless you can justify going forward there.
yes. And I think this is going to increase by with AI because now everyone can create features out of the blue in an extremely fast fashion without caring about the cost. So I really, yes, the main concept that I think always try to think about is the laboratory. You want to have a place, you want to structure it so that if something, if you can experiment freely into that environment, but when something explodes, it just stays into that. I'm thinking about you see in the let's go back to the data center, but even in any company, you have budgets. What you do with your budget in your specialty, you do whatever you want. Okay, I got 2 million budget from IT. I can buy servers, I can buy network. No one, almost no one, is going to come back to me and ask me what I've done with that. So that's my sandbox. Inside that, I do whatever I want, but I cannot go out of it without asking permission in some form of way. And I think we need something equivalent in our environment. We need to make sure that we sandboxing, and maybe AI would force us to sandbox every single feature at that point, or every single small piece will have tons of boxes,
Right.
but with automation, you can make them work together. But overall, you know that it all fits into something that is strategically acceptable for the company.
Wrap up. Is there any other takeaways that you want to bring up that we haven't talked about yet from the State of FinOps survey?
Not like this. I can talk. Well, I would say one is interesting is the fact that it seems that we are moving towards more reporting to the CTO and the CIO, except for the CFO. And on one side, I like it. On the other side, it really depends on the. I worry that if it's for retail company, the CFO has more power. If it is for tech company, the CTO has more power. So check if your new reporting line, if you've changed, is better than the previous one.
Really interesting. I think yeah, similar to that, I think we were talking about yesterday, the FinOps as a practice, it's such a multidimensional problem of what you need in your company. It's not just a crawl, walk, run. It's not just where you're in your cloud journey. It also depends on what your industry is and what your business is as well.
Yes.
A small company that is very AI native, B2C, has very different needs from FinOps than a large institutional bank will. Even if they're, starting the cloud journey or mature, and trying to solve that puzzle of where do we begin? Right? What are the things I should prioritize today? Oftentimes when I go to FinOps X, the conversations, the hallways are the same. It's never really about these niche optimizations. It's always like, this worked for me in my company, and I want to explain to you. And
Yep.
oftentimes I think the worry I get is that what worked for you in your company is not going to work for another person unless they really understand it is the same exact company, which is impossible. Right? One major bank may be fully in the cloud, another one is starting the cloud migration journey. Comparing notes on what's working for one and the other, it's good on one level, but it's not prescriptive and to say you need exactly this, and this is how you will succeed in FinOps there. With that, I think we'll wrap up then. Frank, great
Yep.
conversation as always. Looking forward to doing many more of these with you.
Oh, yeah, same here. I think we're going to have lots of fun. We're going to share lots of knowledge and lots of thinking too. I'm going to lose even the hair I don't have.
Well, hopefully, maybe mine will start to get ungrayed because FinOps is giving me a lot of white hairs now. So we'll see. Next episode will be very special. Frank and I will be in person live in London. That will be coming out soon. Very excited to actually meet and continue this conversation. Thanks again for listening.